today's the day. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what you come up with. This is day 8 of this 10-day course where you are learning how to become a screenwriter. But before we start, let's just do a quick recap of what we have learned so far. Day number 1 was all about generating an idea that you are going to be happy to work with for this screenplay. Day number 2 was talking about themes as well as starting to understand a bit more about our protagonist. Day number 3 was about story structure and how all the different elements are used to craft a story. Day number 4, we went a bit further into character development. We spoke a bit more about the protagonist, our antagonist, and our side characters. Day number 5, we used all of those materials we had so far and started to create an outline, and then hopefully also use that outline to start creating our scenes. On day number 6, we learned a bit more about screenplay formatting, which of course we're going to be using a lot of that today. Woo-hoo! Day number 7, we went in and had a look at dialogue, learning a few just tips and tricks of how to write dialogue that has a balance between realistic and dramatic, as well as looking at a few other tools like subtext. And then that brings us till today. You should have everything you need to start writing your screenplay. I'm going to go through a few things that are going to help you out. So once again, for this challenge, the type of film that we're going for, I'm going to recommend that you stick to a maximum of 10 pages because I feel like that's more achievable to do within a short period of time, but it's also a long enough story to the point where you can still fit a bit of meat in there and make it quite interesting and have multiple scenes and multiple characters here and there. And then once again, as you know, the same kind of thing I've mentioned in previous videos is that if this is your first screenplay, if you are absolutely learning this from scratch, you've never done it before, then I would recommend trying to keep it as simple as possible. You know, minimal characters, minimal locations. One thing I want you to keep in mind when you are writing this first draft of your screenplay, just like in some of the earlier videos, we are not aiming for perfection. We aren't even aiming to make something that is good. We are just aiming to get it done. And I'll tell you why a little bit later. There's a reason why screenwriters call the first draft of a screenplay the vomit draft. And that is because the idea is to essentially get all of this information, all of these ideas out of your head and just vomit them out onto the page. It's going to be an absolute mess. The grammar is going to be terrible. All the characters will sound the same. The dialogue will be awful. All of these things. It is important that you simply just get the script done. You finish the first draft no matter how ugly it looks. Because then later on, in tomorrow's lesson, we're going to be working on rewrites. So the important thing to remember is that writing happens in the rewrites. That is where the story is created. We've done all of this planning. We've talked about character arcs and story structure, and we've mapped out outlines and all these things. And all of this planning is really important. But the thing to remember is that you're going to learn a lot more about the story while you are writing the story. So while we do have all these outlines, and it's really important to do all this initial planning, when you actually start writing it out, you're going to learn new things that you wouldn't be able to learn any other way. And you might even discover that the steps that you had in your outline aren't actually the best way to tell this story, and you might need to go back and change a few things. You might sort of just learn new things. Maybe the title is going to need to change because it isn't relevant anymore because you've discovered just, you know, through maybe gut feelings or something where the story naturally needs to go. That is why it's so important that you get this vomit draft done. You just splurt everything out, because once everything is written and it's down and it's on the page, then it makes it a lot easier to see and feel what parts of the story work and which parts of the story don't work. And that is a very important thing. If something just doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel like it's working, then it probably isn't, you know, and it might warrant getting rid of it or maybe just adjusting it somehow. Or perhaps you realize that maybe there are some scenes missing, or maybe you realize there are some scenes in there that aren't needed at all, in which case you can get rid of those too. What you should have ready before you start writing today is that completed outline, and hopefully you've started breaking those into scenes. And then hopefully, as per the previous lesson, you've actually taken one scene from your film and written it out. And again, it doesn't need to be amazing, but if you've got one written out, then you're already ahead, in which case today will be a lot easier. The first part of this video is just talking about the mindset when you are writing this first draft, or the vomit draft. As we are writing today, we are not trying to make a good script. We are just trying to make a finished script. There's a few sayings out there talking about how perfection is the enemy of momentum. Perfection is the enemy of progress. You know, there'll be a lot of people who are trying to make something perfect, but nothing can ever truly be perfect, especially in screenwriting, which means it'll never be at the point where they feel ready to start writing. And so that's kind of why that's the wrong place to start in this process. That's why the best place to start is to just start. You know, take what little pieces you have and just start writing. It might not make any sense at all, but I guarantee you some of it will feel right. Some of it will make sense, and you can build from there. An important habit to kind of practice when you are doing this vomit draft is to fight the temptation to go back and edit too much. Like, you can make a couple little tweaks here and there. Once you've written a scene, try not to go back and then do more of that scene. And that's easier said than done. I really struggle with that part because I'll write something and I'll try to move on to the next scene, but then I realize, but that previous scene I wrote is terrible. Why would I just keep adding on to that? It's kind of a hard thing for me, at least, to not go back and try to fix what I've already done. The best thing you can do right now is just power through it and get that vomit draft done. There are so many screenwriters out there who they will start countless screenplays, but they'll never finish it because they are just unendingly going back and just fixing and fixing and fixing, and so they'll get the first quarter of the script done, they will just never get past that because they're just so fixated on making sure that everything is perfect along the way, which it isn't. Another helpful thing, which is something that I like to do when I'm writing my vomit draft or the first draft, is that, you know, sometimes there will be sections where I don't really know what it is that's going to happen yet. Like, or maybe it's just like, I don't really know what the exact dialogue will be for a scene. And so I will simply just put in brackets, they say something about bravery or whatever it is, you know. So I just kind of put a placeholder, so that which is basically just a note of the kind of thing that should go there later on once I figure that out. And then sometimes I'll get someone else to help me edit the script. And, you know, usually they all come in with a fresh mind and they can sort of fill in some of those blanks. Yeah, so that's kind of a handy thing. So if you get to a point where you're stuck or you've got a bit of a mental block or something, that's totally fine. Just put down a note of like the general idea of what's going to go there, and then move on. Just keep moving on. It's momentum. So we're going to keep moving today. The idea is that by the end of today, we are going to have that entire first draft of the script finished. So because of that, we are going to do a couple of exercises. Now, the first one is a 45-minute sprint. You can do that now or you can do it later. But if you're going to do it now, pause the video, set a timer for 45 minutes, and force yourself to keep writing for that entire length of time. So like I said, write continuously and do not go back and edit. And then throughout the day, you're simply going to take 5 to 10 minute breaks, and then you're just going to repeat, and you're going to keep doing this until the script is done. If we are working on a script that is 5 to 10 pages or so, then it should only take maybe, hopefully, 2 or 3 of these writing sessions for you to get it done. And hey, look, maybe you're like a super wizard screenwriter, in which case you might get it all done in that first bit. I'm probably more of a slower writer, so I would probably need a bit longer. So for example, in the past, you know, I would probably write maybe 8 to 10 pages in maybe like a 4-hour gap, perhaps, something kind of like that. Everybody writes differently, so yours could be completely different to my kind of timeline. And then, as I said, the other exercise, which is mainly just if you come up to any kind of moments that you aren't sure of, then just put in a placeholder and move on. So there are a few different things that you can do to try to help yourself get through certain sections. So as I said, we're going to be doing some writing sprints. You're going to move on if there are parts that you don't quite understand yet. You can also try to do dialogue only writing. Now, of course, that won't be what the finished script is like. I've seen some filmmakers who will have their finished script, which is essentially just everyone's dialogue in the film, and it doesn't have any action, and so we don't really know what's going on. But that being said, when you were just sort of getting started with writing and kind of learning about it, you would probably naturally be thinking more about what the characters are saying. So you could just simply go through and just purely write the dialogue of the characters in a scene and then come back to it later and fill in whatever is missing. Another thing that you can do, which is probably later on, and this might even be something that we can save until tomorrow, but if you find that you have time today, then something that you can do that might help you understand if you're going in the right direction is recording yourself talking through the scenes. So maybe you're sitting at your computer and your mind is just completely blank and you don't know what to say. So maybe it might be easier if you just shut your laptop, shut your computer, turn it off, and simply just record your voice and just talk through the scene. Because sometimes some of us might be more visual, some of us might be more audio. What? I don't know. You're more naturally in tune with listening to things rather than looking at things. So a handy thing might just be recording yourself talking through the scene, and it might be an absolute mess, but you can describe what the place looks like, you can describe the action, you can describe the dialogue, and then you can come back to it a bit later and just, fix it up so it looks a bit neater. This is something that I will do quite a lot. So sometimes when I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to say for some of these videos, maybe I'm driving to work or I'm driving to go and do some errands or something, and I will pretty much just record myself talking, because when I'm driving in the car, I'm not overthinking what I'm saying, and so I'm just talking, and I'll actually get a lot of really great stuff out of it, and it'll come across a lot more natural as well, which is definitely a bonus. And yes, so while you're writing this vomit draft, keep it messy. We want it to be messy, because if it's messy, then it means that there are a lot of things out there, and it means that when it comes time to do the rewrites, it is very clear which things work and which things don't. So keep it messy and keep moving forward. So you can even maybe set yourself a page goal if this is something that helps. So perhaps you have a goal to do 2 to 3 pages per hour. Now that doesn't sound like much, but sometimes it can take a considerable amount of time to write a scene, because you have to sort of come up with all the different elements. But that being said, like I said earlier, maybe your writing speed is completely different to mine, in which case it's important that you find a pace that works best for you. Have a go at that first 45-minute sprint and just see how far you get. And then depending on that, you might just sort of have to adjust. But it is important that after that little sprint, that you do take some time to rest, because otherwise you're going to stress yourself out. You might even get sick, and it's going to sort of put you off of this whole thing, and it's going to spoil your week. And we want to get through to the end, and we want you feeling like you've done something, you've achieved something, you're victorious. So do the sprints, and then take some time to rest, and then come back and do another sprint. And you can rest as long as you feel like you need to rest, just as long as you come back, just as long as we can get that vomit draft done today. This is where a lot of the things we've already created are going to come in handy. So you've got your outline, which is really just a step-by-step guide of what your film is. And as we would have done, hopefully, in one of the previous videos, is we would have used that outline, we would have separated each thing into different scenes. We would have, every one of those scenes will have their own heading. So at this point, it's really just about expanding each of those. So you might have a sentence or two for each of them. Now it's just expand each of them into a paragraph, and then expand each of those into like a couple of paragraphs, and then format that into a screenplay. So separate the dialogue from the action, and then boom, you've got your scenes finished, and do that for all of them, and then you've got your finished vomit draft. And that's usually how I like to do a lot of my writing. And I'm not sure if it's like a common technique to use, but I feel like it's something that works for me, because I wouldn't actually say that I'm like the best screenwriter in the world or anything like that. This is just something that works for me. So I'll write out a single sentence, and then I'll expand that into a couple of sentences, and then I'll just keep expanding until that scene is finished. And I'll do that for each of the scenes, and then, I'll do this whether it's a short film or an episode or a feature film or whatever. And then another thing to remember is that the protagonists and their decisions and their emotions are what influences and leads the story. Sometimes you might have something written down in your outline, you start thinking about it through the protagonist's perspective, and you feel like in that moment, no, like this person would be devastated. They're gonna do this because that just makes more sense. In which case, like, explore that, write in that direction, and just see where it ends up. The process of writing the story reveals the real story. That is it for today. You guys have a bit of work to do, so I'm not going to make this video too long. Your homework, of course, today is to finish that vomit draft. Just speed through it. Doesn't need to be amazing. Just the important thing is that we get it done. So you're going to be writing your complete vomit draft today, which means 5 to 10 page script. One important thing to note is that roughly 1 page of a screenplay equals around 1 minute of the finished film on screen. And that might kind of sound like a weird thing, but most of the time when I've kind of looked at my scripts, it does sort of turn out that way. You know, some things can obviously change it, perhaps if you have a director or something that really wants to draw out certain moments or skip past other moments. But typically 1 page equals 1 minute of finished screen time. And look, if you are trying to work on this today and you just have an absolute blank and nothing's coming to you and just you're not in the mood, or maybe you're sick or something like that, then it's important to rest and then do this when you are feeling right. Of course, we really want to create a great story, but it's more important that you take care of yourself and that you enjoy the process as well. That is it for today. Good luck with writing your vomit draft. If you have any questions at all, you can contact me directly and I'll help out as best I can. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.